I'm so happy to be here. Although every time I get ready to tell the story of the worst relationship of my life, I kind of question why I'm doing it, because every single time it's painful. And I think it'll be a little bit painful for you all to hear it as well. But I want to promise you that it has a happy ending. And I also want to promise you that I'm not at all ashamed of what happened to me. As I was coming here tonight, I was trying to put myself in your shoes. And the way that I felt when I was getting ready to graduate from high school was that I was very grateful for my high school community. I had a great high school experience, and I hope that you all have too. No high school is perfect. And I'm sure this one has flaws that you all know about that I may never even know about. But it seems like a pretty great place to me and a very strong community. And whether you know it or not, you're getting ready to really leave this place and go out and find new communities and new relationships that will be as important to you as the relationships that you've had over the last several years here. And if you are very fortunate, you will fall in love and you'll find somebody who maybe you want to spend the rest of your life with. And that's really what I'm here to talk to you about tonight, is that whole wonderful, crazy process of falling in love with somebody and how powerful it is and how seductive it is and sometimes how dangerous it can be. You might not know this, but you are currently at the age where you are at the greatest risk of being in an abusive relationship. Women and girls are 3 times as likely to be abused between the ages of 16 and 24 as they are later in life. And since I've already said women and girls, I want to add to it something that some of you may already know, which is that boys and men are abuse victims too. 85% of victims are female, but that 15% that is not female, that's a lot of people. That's millions of men. And men are abused in heterosexual relationships and homosexual relationships. And it's particularly hard for men and boys to ask for help because it goes so against all of our ideas of what it means to be a man and what it means to be masculine. And unfortunately, what usually happens to men who confess that they are being abused by a woman is, you can imagine what happens, is that people laugh. So it's hard to be a female victim and break the silence and get help, but it's even harder to be a man. So I wanted to just say that because I think it doesn't get said enough. So I grew up here in Washington, D.C. Well, not exactly here, but pretty close. And my dad was a lawyer and my mom was a teacher. And I grew up in a home with no violence. I actually think that the people who are at most risk of being abused are people who grow up with it in their families, so they think it's normal, or people like me who grew up with none of it, so we're pretty sure it's never going to happen to us. And I knew nothing about abuse. And I was close to my father, and I have a brother, and I had lots and lots of boys and then boyfriends when I was young, and it never entered my head that any man ever would want to hurt me or that would hurt me. It just wasn't anywhere on my radar, and it made me very vulnerable and very naive. So the type of kid I was when I was your age is that I was a little bit of a troublemaker in a good way, I think. But I was mostly like a real goody two-shoes. I always sat in the front row. I wasn't a straight-A student, but I really tried to be. And I was really into following rules and making everything look perfect on the outside. It's kind of the type of family that I came from. There was lots of love in my family, but it was a family where you had to look good at everything that you did. So both of my parents had gone to Harvard. They very much wanted me to go there. I was lucky enough to get in and to go there. And then when I graduated, I got what I thought was the best job on the planet, which was that I was a writer and editor at 17 magazine in New York. And I really felt like, I worked so hard in high school and in college to get these educational degrees. And now that I'm in New York working, I felt like my life had begun. And for a bunch of different reasons, I had not dated in college at all. So I thought, okay, I'm going to make up for lost time. And, I had my first little green American Express card. I had my first apartment, my first adult roommate, my first full-time job. I just felt like, okay, it's all starting now. And I have to tell you all, it was a fabulous way to feel. Really fun. I was on top of the world. And if you had met me then, I think that you would have said, now that's the last person who's going to let a man hit her. And if you didn't think that yourself, I would have told you that. I would have told you, and I did say this many times, that women who let men beat them had no self-esteem. They must be stupid. They must be really scared. There must be something wrong with them, with the woman. I never once thought there must be something wrong with the man who beats her. The biases and victim blaming in our society goes incredibly deep. So I was this writer and editor at 17 magazine. I was really into meeting guys. And so New York is like a mecca for this. So I met men everywhere I went, and it was so incredibly fun. And one night, I met a guy on the New York City subway. I had just had dinner with my best friend from childhood. This hasn't happened to you all yet, but she had just gotten engaged. She was my first really close friend who'd gotten engaged. And I was just sort of awestruck that somebody had said to her, I love you so much that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. So I left her apartment, and it was cold and raining. It was a January night, and I got on the subway, and I looked like hell. My hair was all, what happens to your hair when it gets snow in it. And I had on my Cambridge, Massachusetts winter gear, which was a full-length down coat that looked horrible, and LL Bean boots. I looked nothing like I wanted to look like when I was meeting a guy. But there was a free seat next to this man on the subway, and I sat in it. And I didn't really pay that much attention to him, but then everybody else got off the train. So if you can imagine it, it's just me and this complete stranger, and we're sort of touching each other. And if you all have ever been on the New York City subway, you know what you do when that happens. The protocol is that you get up and you move away, because it's sort of like an unwritten rule that you're not supposed to touch a stranger. But my mom was a very kind person, and she had always said to me, you should never hurt somebody's feelings if you can avoid it. And so I didn't move away from him because I was afraid to hurt his feelings. And he told me later that was the first thing he noticed about me that he liked. And to me, when I think about it now, that's actually the first red flag that I ignored. So he started chatting me up. He told me he too had just graduated from another Ivy League school, and he worked at this big Wall Street bank. And I knew he was telling me all this because he wanted to assure me that he was safe, that he was, not like some crazy guy on the subway. And he got up at his stop and walked away, and I could draw you a picture right now of what he looked like walking away, like the back of his head. I just thought I'd never see him again. Lo and behold, he called me a month later at 17. I had told him my first name and where I worked. And I was so flattered that he had tracked me down. I thought, God, looking the way I did and everything, that I made such an impression on this man in just a couple of minutes that he was calling me. And that, I think, is the second red flag. That I was so flattered, and that he had gone so out of his way to sort of to find me. So he explained, who he was, and he was laughing at himself and how long it had taken him to find me, and I agreed to go out on a date with him. And when I walked into the bar where we were meeting, he was so excited to see me that he stood up really suddenly and he knocked over the entire table. And it was so flattering. It was so like, wow, this guy really is crazy about me, and he doesn't even really know me. And I thought he was really goofy and geeky, but it was actually incredibly charming and disarming. Because in that early phase, it was kind of like he said, Leslie, you're up here and I'm here. and I'm trying to reach you. And I started dating him, along with the other guys I was dating, so it wasn't anything exclusive or that serious. But he started really, really making me feel amazing. And he told me things that no other guys were telling me at the time, that no other man had ever told me, no other boy had ever told me. He said, you're the most beautiful girl I've ever dated. I love that you went to Harvard and you're smart. So he wasn't intimidated at all. He understood that I was at 17 magazine because I wanted to help teenage girls, and he thought that was great. He told me two things that really made my heart crack open. He told me that he knew I was going to be a great writer one day, which it was like he could see inside me, that he knew how much that's what I wanted. He also told me something very unusual that I assure you no 22-year-old men were telling me at the time. He said to me, and I also know you are going to make a great mother one day. And I felt like I didn't know what had hit me. We'd probably been out on 10 dates at this point, and I felt like this man, he understands me. He understands me better than my own mother does, my own sister, that best friend who had just gotten engaged, who'd known me since 4th grade. He understands me. How lucky am I that I randomly met this man on the New York City subway who is handsome and smart and well-educated and self-deprecating and who worships me. I had no idea that this was actually part of a very carefully orchestrated trap disguised as love. That's why I call the book Crazy Love, is that it felt so much like love to me. And when domestic violence victims, when any abuse victim talks about the beginning of a relationship, this is the way she talks, or he talks. It's a fairy tale at the beginning. But it's not like it came wrapped up or with these neon signs saying, Leslie, beware, this is a fairy tale. It came as a fairy tale, and I felt it. It was like being on drugs. It was like I just couldn't believe that this had happened. And it was so unexpected and so incredibly amazing that this had happened to me at this point in my life. And I was hook, line, and sinker in love with him within 2 or 3 months. And I stopped dating all the other guys, and I started to just see him. And within a few, maybe a week or 10 days of us becoming serious in this way, he did something very interesting, which is he gave me a key to his apartment. And I thought, God, I've just hit the gold mine. I found the one man in New York City who's not afraid of commitment, And he said, I want you to have this, because I want you to know how special you are to me, and I want you to know that you can come to my apartment anytime you want. I don't have to be there. You don't have to tell me. It's yours. And one of the red flags in abuse is that the other person wants to make a commitment too early. But again, it doesn't come with this red flag saying, I'm making a commitment too early because I want to abuse you one day. It came disguised as love and as somebody who trusted me and who wanted me to feel safe with him. It was really intoxicating. It was brilliant. So that's the fairy tale. The next stage in abuse is always that you have to isolate the victim. Because, they don't hit you on the first date. That's not the way abuse happens, but also abusers are not that stupid. There would be no second date, right? We wouldn't be here talking about this if that's the way it happened. It happens very slowly and gradually. But in order to be able to successfully abuse somebody, you have to make sure they can't tell people that you're doing it. So you have to isolate them. There are lots and lots of ways to isolate a victim. You can do it geographically by making them move somewhere. You can do it financially by getting them to be financially dependent upon you. That you have the one car, you have the paycheck, you have the money. You can do it by getting them pregnant and then pregnant again so that they have lots and lots of kids, and they're so busy taking care of the kids and so dependent on you that they can't leave you. But the most important thing to do is to psychologically isolate the victim. And Connor was brilliant at this as well. And what he did, the first thing he did to isolate from everybody, was that he asked me to marry him, which you'd think is a wonderful thing. And it was wonderful. It was one of the happiest days of my life. But he said, as soon as I said yes, he said, well, I have this really great idea. Since it's so special, the way that we feel for each other, let's not tell anybody. Let's keep it a secret. Just for a couple of weeks or months so that we can enjoy it just us. And I thought this sounded so romantic. And so I said yes to that too. But what do secrets do? They isolate you from everybody. Isolated me from my mom, from my sister, from my dad, from my coworkers at 17, from my friends from Harvard, because I had a secret that they didn't know about. And even more Machiavellian is that when I eventually told them this great news that I'd gotten engaged, and that in fact I'd been engaged for 6 months, they were mad at me that I had kept this wonderful secret from them. Can you imagine how your family would feel if you had been engaged to somebody for 6 months and hadn't told them? Or if your best friend had been engaged and hadn't told you? They were mad at me, which isolated me even further and created this distance between us. It was really smart. And then Connor did the other traditional ways of isolating a victim. He got me to leave my job at 17 and move to a tiny town in New England. He quit his Wall Street job. And he wrapped it all up in this magical fantasy of, now that he knew what true love was like because of me, he didn't need this big, impressive Wall Street job. He didn't want to make a lot of money. We didn't need New York, and it would be really wonderful if we moved to this small town in New England to start our married life together. And I started to get the feeling that there was something a little off here, but I didn't know what it was. And I still had that really early love intoxication where I felt like this is my soulmate and I will do anything for him. And in fact, it's my job as a strong, smart, independent woman to help him and to do anything I can to show him what love is all about and to really be strong. And the reason that Connor needed that kind of strength was that along the way, he had confessed that he too had a secret, a really terrible secret, which is that starting at age 4, he had been viciously abused by his stepfather. And when I say abused, I don't mean that he was spanked too hard. I mean that this man broke Connor's arm, he broke his collarbone, he broke his nose, he broke his ribs. Connor, starting at age 4, a 4-year-old is like that big. Connor was in and out of the hospital 3 or 4 times a year because of what his stepfather did to him. And his stepfather also beat his mother in front of him, which is the worst thing you can do to a child. In some ways, it's even worse than beating the child themselves, is to beat their mother in front of them and have the child be helpless to do anything to stop it. This man really was a monster. And it had wrecked Connor's life. He had to drop out of school in 8th grade and get his GED, and then eventually kind of claw his way back into the U.S. educational system and get this degree from an Ivy League school. So I felt so sorry for him. And I felt like I'd had such a good childhood by comparison, that it was almost like I had been given too much love, and I wanted to give him some to make up for what had happened to him. To me, the fact that I felt sorry for him is actually the biggest red flag of all. Grown-ups usually don't want you to feel sorry for them. You probably don't want your friends to feel sorry for you. In fact, you'd probably do just about anything to make sure that one of your friends or somebody who you were dating didn't feel sorry for you. So if you ever see somebody who you feel sorry for, I want you to remember in your head that there might be something wrong with this equation because it's not normal. But I was this really giving, understanding person, and when I heard that he had been abused as a kid, He wasn't crying the first day he told me about the abuse, and I was sobbing. It was like I was doing all the emotional work for both of us. Anyway, do you notice that he hasn't even hit me yet? Fairy tale, isolation, further isolation. And then what usually happens is you introduce the threat of abuse. And if he or she doesn't run away then you do the actual abuse. Connor didn't really introduce much of a threat of abuse. He went to just full-on abuse. It was 5 days before our wedding. I had planned a magical wedding at Harvard's Memorial Church. I was still like that person who made everything look great on the outside. And it was in early June 3rd, it's actually coming up. And 5 days before the wedding, Connor got angry at me about something. It's one of the only times we'd ever had a fight in almost 2 years together. And he didn't beat me. He strangled me. It was very early in the morning. I still had on my nightgown. He was getting ready for work. We'd moved to this tiny town in New England where I was a freelance writer, and he had a paycheck and took the car to work every day, so I was very isolated. And he was angry at me about something, and he put his hands around my neck, and I hope that nobody in this room has ever been strangled. It is a terrifying thing to have happen to you. He squeezed so tightly that I couldn't scream. I couldn't scream for help. I couldn't scream, stop, you're hurting me. I couldn't even breathe. And he used the chokehold to hit my head up against the wall. And he was screaming at me the whole time, screaming and yelling. And when he was done, he threw me down on the floor, and he went and he finished getting dressed, and he got in the car and he went to work. 7:30 in the morning. And for a few minutes I knew what had happened. I knew that I couldn't marry him, that an insane lunatic had taken over this man who I loved. I had come face to face with the worst rage I'd ever seen in my life. And it had took me completely by surprise. But I still knew what it was. And I knew that this was domestic violence. But denial is a really, really big part of any kind of an abuse. Whether you're being abused as a kid, or you're an elderly person who's being abused, or you're being sexually abused by a coach, you deny it. And it's a really strong psychological force. You need it actually to survive. But the downside of it is that it makes it really hard for you to admit the truth about what's happening to you. So what happened to me that morning is that my denial just crept in. And this is what my denial said to me. My denial said, you know what, he didn't really beat you. You know, as if strangulation didn't count. He didn't hit you. My denial said, he's very, very sorry. That was not true. He had not apologized. He had not given any sign that what he thought what he had done was wrong. I told myself that it was just cold feet, that he was nervous about the wedding, because that's what people said happened to men, that they got nervous before they made a commitment like that. And you know, with his family background, of course he was really nervous. You know, we were becoming a family. He was so scared. So I felt sorry for him again. But the biggest lie that my denial told me was that he loved me so much that he would never do it again. Because he wouldn't possibly risk losing me. You know, that woman who he worshipped, the most beautiful girl he'd ever dated, who he loved. He wasn't going to risk losing me, right? So he would never do it again. So those 10 bruises on my neck from his fingers, they healed just in time so that none of the guests at the wedding, none of my family members, nobody noticed them. And that Saturday, I put on my mom's wedding dress and I stood up in Harvard's Memorial Church and I married him. And he beat me twice more on the honeymoon. And I did not know what had happened to my life. It felt to me like yesterday I was that happy, confident young woman in New York with my life in front of me, meeting this wonderful man, and now I had just gotten married to a man who was beating me on a regular basis. Things got even worse when Connor started buying guns. I had never seen or touched a gun in my life except in the holster of a police officer. And Connor started buying them and bringing them home. And they were legal where we lived. In fact, his company, he worked for a Fortune 500 manufacturing company. They had an employee gun range. And Connor kept the guns loaded all the time. And whenever we got in a fight, which happened several times a month, the fight would always end with him pulling back my hair and holding the gun to my head. And, I was, at this point, I was 24. Nothing in my life had prepared me to deal with this. And I knew nothing about what was happening. And if you had asked me at this point, if you had walked up to me, if anybody had walked up to me and said, something seems wrong, is there any way that you're being abused? I would have said, absolutely not. And I wouldn't have been lying. I would have thought I was telling the truth. Because I wasn't a battered wife. I wasn't being abused. Not me and not him. This man loved me. I would have said to you, no, this is who I am. I'm a strong, smart, independent woman, and I'm in love with a really troubled man. He's troubled because he was abused as a kid, but I'm going to help him, I'm going to love him, and I'm going to make this all better. That's what I would have told you. It's really hard to help somebody who has that idea that they don't need help and that they're not even being abused. So eventually I did get help. Eventually it got so bad that my friends, my closest friends, and I think some of my family members too, noticed that something in me had changed. I had become like a different person. I was so scared all the time. But I tell you something that is hard for people to understand, but it's true, and it's one of the many reasons I stayed with him, is that when he wasn't enraged like that, when he wasn't holding a loaded gun to my head, he was still magnificent. He was still that man who told me that I was going to be a great writer and a great mother one day. He still really believed in me the way no one ever had in my life. I often say that Connor was 49% the greatest person I've ever known, and 51% the most troubled. And the troubled part won out. But one of the reasons I stayed was that he was still so great, and it was still magical between us when it wasn't awful. I also stayed because I really wanted to help him, and I thought that I should. I knew that if I told people what was going on, that you guys would make me leave, and that you'd get him in trouble. And I didn't think that would help. And I thought that I had this idea that something that a woman did for a man was to love him through problems like this. So the way that I eventually got out and I got help was that one of my friends confronted me. And if you ever think that somebody is being abused, this is what you should do. It was a man. It was actually Connor's best friend. And he came up to me one day when I was alone. I wasn't alone very much. Connor liked to keep a very close eye on me. But one day when Ed and I were alone for a very short period of time, he said, "Look, I think something seems wrong here." And he said, "Do you know that when Connor's in the room, your voice shakes? And that when he's gone, it doesn't?" And he said, "I just need to know that you're okay, because I'm worried about you." And that's all he said. And that's all it took. It just broke through all of my denial, because I could see on his face that he was so scared for me and that he really cared. And also, I knew he cared about Connor too, and he wasn't trying to blame this all on Connor. And that made a huge difference to me. And I wasn't able to confess to him what was happening, and I wasn't even able to say anything. But that changed me, the fact that he had noticed and that he had tried to help me by kind of holding up a mirror to who I was becoming. And because Ed had done that, I was able to confide in my best friend from Harvard, who, she is still my best friend. She's an amazing person. She's a pediatrician, a very strong, grounded, loving person. And I told her what was happening. And boy, do I hit the jackpot in friends in my life. Because she looked at me and she did what any of you would do if one of your friends said, my husband is beating me and pushing me downstairs and throwing food at me and holding guns up my head. She said, you have to leave him right now. And because I trusted her so much and I was such good friends with her, I told her the truth, which was that I didn't want to leave. I said, I don't want to leave him. I can't leave him. And to her immense credit, this magnificent friend looked me in the face and said, I understand. I think you're lucky that you love somebody so much. I don't know how she was able to say that. And I'm not going to make you to leave, and I'm not going to judge you, and I'm just going to be your friend. She said, you can call me anytime. If he does this to you, you can come to my house anytime. I won't tell anybody, but I will do anything to help you. So now I had two people who knew, and they gave me a lot of strength and a lot of courage. And I eventually gave Connor an ultimatum. I told him, I had never confronted him about it, believe it or not. I was afraid to confront him. It's really dangerous to confront an abuser. And I just so much wanted to have the fairy tale continue. But I did finally tell him that he had to stop. I specifically told him that I wouldn't have kids with him if he kept on abusing me. And he wanted children very badly, and I did too. But I said I couldn't do that. And I told him that I would leave him if he hit me again. And it was a really brave thing to do, and it was a really scary thing to do. And he was incredible. People will tell you that abusers are the best at apologies as anybody that you can ever imagine. And they really are. It was the first time he had ever apologized, and he just was crying and crying and crying and holding my hands and saying, I'm so sorry, I don't mean to hurt you. I'm so sorry I've been doing this. It's just because of what my stepfather did to me. I can't get past it. But I don't want to hurt you. You're everything to me. You're my family. I need you. He said everything that I needed to hear. And I believed him. And I gave him a second chance. And he didn't abuse me for 6 months. And I thought, well, that was easy. If I just confronted him the first time, he would have stopped. And I really believed he was never going to do it again. And then one night, I made him mad again. And the things that I did to make him mad were like overcooking dinner. They were such minor things. Anything could trigger it. I never had any idea what was going to push him off the edge. But he got mad, and it triggered the worst beating. It was so much worse than all the others. It lasted a really long time. I don't know how long it lasted because I was unconscious for most of it, because he kept strangling me over and over again. And he was a very strong man, and he had a black belt in karate and a black sash in kung fu, and he just beat the hell out of me. He kicked me, he ripped off all my clothes, he broke my favorite wedding picture over my head. It was absolutely terrifying. I was sure he was going to kill me. Really sure. Like I had this, it felt like there was a block of ice in my stomach. I was so sure that he was going to kill me, that my own husband was going to kill me. And he didn't, thankfully. But the thing that happened to me that night is what gave me the strength to leave. Because I knew he was going to kill me. And I heard this little voice in me that said, it's so wonderful that you love him. It's wonderful. He obviously really needs it. He had this terrible childhood. He needs help. But you have to make a choice. You have to choose him or you. And that night, I decided that I chose myself. And as soon as he was done, I asked him to leave. And it was over. It was like the rage had passed through him, and he was crying and apologizing. And I asked him to leave, and as soon as he left, I called the police, which is something I had never done before. And it's not always like this, but in my case, the police were incredible. They knew exactly what had happened, they believed me, and they painted a picture of my future if I stayed with him. And I'll never forget one of the police officers saying to me, I was standing there, I was all covered in cuts and bruises, and my neck was all sore, and I had put on this like bathrobe because he'd ripped off all my clothes. So I'm standing there in my own living room in a bathrobe with two men who I've never seen before in my life, and one of them points to the floor and says, if you go back to him, one day we're going to come here, and you're going to be dead there. You're going to be dead on your floor. And they said, we see this all the time. We see it. They were experts in domestic violence. Police usually are. And they told me what to do. They told me to file a restraining order. They told me to file for divorce. And I did all of it. I would have done anything that those police officers told me to do. I never saw either one of them again, and I never thanked them. I was never able to thank them. But they saved my life. And the thing that was the most significant is that I felt like those two police officers cared about me in a way that my own husband didn't. Two strangers, I could feel that they loved me and that they wanted to help me, and it was a really powerful thing. So, at age 27, I got divorced. It was really, really hard. I actually had to pay him. I had to pay him a lump sum of money to go away. And I had a brilliant lawyer who said, if you pay him this money, he's going to think that he's beaten you forever, and you're never going to hear from him again. And that's what you want. And that is what happened. I have not heard from Connor in over 25 years. Have not seen him. I've not seen him since the very last time I saw him, right at that point. And several years later, I met a wonderful guy, the father of Tally and Max and Morgan, and I got a second chance. I got a second chance that a lot of people don't get, because so many people are killed by their abusers or are not able to leave. And after I had been remarried for a couple of years and I'd started having kids, I decided I wanted to try to write this story. And I wanted to write it because so many people didn't know that I was a domestic violence survivor because I couldn't talk about it. I was in so much shock for a very long time. So they didn't know, so they would say things to me like the kind of things that I had said before. Somebody would be in the news for having been abused, and they would say, she just has no self-esteem. She doesn't have any money, she's uneducated, all the stereotypes. And it made me feel so bad and so angry that I thought, I want to try to write a book that explains this. And I think that that's what I did. And then I did a TED Talk for the same reason, to try to explain to people why we stay, what domestic violence really is. It is crazy love. It's a psychological trap disguised as love. And I'm here today to tell my story because I was able to get out, because I didn't have children with my abuser, so I don't have anybody to protect. And I think it's really important for victims who can break the silence and talk about it to do so. Not everybody can, and not everybody wants to, and I certainly didn't for a long time, but now that I do, I feel like it's important to do it. So that is my story. And now we're going to turn to the next part, which is answering any questions you might have. And I want to tell you all, I know that you have questions, because everybody does. It's really hard to understand how anybody would stay in abuse. And I want to answer your questions. And then the last thing that I want to get you guys thinking about, which is really something to wrap your heads around, is that this room here, the people in this room, there are enough of us here that I absolutely guarantee you that there is somebody here besides me who is currently being abused and who is currently abusing somebody. There are also probably several people in this room who were abused as children, as younger children. And you might not even know it. Like me, you might not even know it. But it's an important thing for us to try to talk about and try to educate ourselves about, so that if it does happen to you, or you realize it has been happening, or you think it's happening to your roommate or your best friend or your mom or your sister, that you'll know how to help them. So thank you all so very much, and now we'll turn it over to your questions. Thank you all so much for listening so carefully. And go ahead and ask a question, and I'll repeat it so that I make sure everybody hears it. Mm-hmm. So that's a great question. It's sort of like, what is emotional abuse? How common is it? Emotional abuse is much more common than physical violence. Physical violence is an extreme form of emotional abuse, really. But emotional abuse is, one of the things that's hard about it is that it's so hard to describe. But love and intimacy are supposed to make you feel great. That's why that's why we fall in love, and that's why we stay in relationships, right? Is that the person's supposed to be supportive of you and to take your side, and it's supposed to be the two of you kind of taking on life. And if somebody is making you feel anything besides that, I think it's worth looking at to see if it's an emotional abuse. If they criticize you, if they don't trust you, if you're afraid to go home to them, those are all signs of abuse. If you start to feel like you're crazy, that's another kind of abuse called gaslighting, which is, for instance, if you were in a relationship and you thought the person you were with was cheating because you saw them with somebody else, and you said, I saw you with this person, what's going on? And instead of saying to you, God, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to make you feel that way, if they said, God, you are just so paranoid and possessive, what is the matter with you? That's gaslighting, and that's emotional abuse. If they insist on having the passcode to your phone, to your computer, to check your messages, all of that, that is abusive. The thing that's so hard about it is that it never comes presented as abuse. Abusers, they often don't even know that they're being abusive. They're just doing what they do. Like if Connor had done that to me, what he would have said is something like this, like, I had this bad relationship and somebody cheated on me, and I'm just really trying to work on it, so it would help me a lot if I could check your text messages. It'll help me, you'll be doing me a favor. It's that kind of complicated thing that eventually you'll realize is emotional abuse. But it's a lot harder to spot, and it's not a crime, and it's really hard to get out of it. Yes? I know, isn't that crazy? It makes me laugh when I think of him telling me that I was going to be a great writer, because he never in his wildest dreams thought that he was going to give me the material to write about. But he did. And you know what? I wish that Connor would tell his story too. I think that the story of an abuse victim is a good story, but the even better story is if he could tell us what was going on in his head. Was he doing this on purpose? That night that he met me on the subway, was he thinking she'll make a great abuse victim? I have no idea. That it would be great. So I wish that he were a good writer too. So yeah, that is a complicated thing. Yeah? I don't know. I really don't know. It's something that I think about a lot. I will tell you, I don't think he was doing it on purpose. It didn't feel that way to me at the time. It felt to me like it was a very troubled guy who had this history of abuse, and he had all this rage inside of him. And for him, intimacy and rage had always gone together. And in fact, intimacy with me was the trigger for it. That's why he first abused me right before the wedding, is that he was getting cold feet in a different way. I think that there are some abusers who are they're like at the far, it's a spectrum, right? They're at the far end of the spectrum, and they say, she looks like a really nice person, she's smaller than I am, she doesn't have family nearby, she'd be a great person to abuse. There are people who are really, really calculated about it, but I think most people are just They have no idea what they're doing, and they're trying to make themselves feel safe, and being in love makes them feel really unsafe. Now, the thing that is so strange that even to this day makes me sad is that Connor pushed away the person who wanted to help him the most. Like he really wanted to let a woman be close to him and help him and love him and heal him. But he couldn't because he was so traumatized by what had happened to him, and he had never gotten any kind of therapy or help for it. I do know that he abused 2 women before me in exactly the same way. He was engaged to somebody for 7 years before me. It turned out that he was older. He was 7 years older than I was when he graduated because of taking time off because he dropped out. And I think that he's gone on to abuse other people too. But I don't know if it's on purpose or not. Yes? Yep. Why is it a red flag to feel sorry for somebody? Thank you for reminding me to repeat the question. Okay, it's not a red flag to feel sorry, to feel sympathetic if your girlfriend's crying, or your dad has had a hard day and he's like cursing at people or whatever. It's not. In general, feeling empathy for somebody is a good thing. But when you feel deeply sorry for an adult, it's a little bit of a strange thing, especially an adult that doesn't have, even an adult with an illness. I think we wouldn't really feel sorry for them. Pity is for abused puppies and starving children. It's not for your partner and equal, and it is a trick. If somebody's trying to intentionally again and again get you to feel sorry for them, it's manipulation. Yeah? What a great question. How can abusers be helped? It's really hard to get help if you're an abuser. Can you imagine how hard it was for me to call the police and be and to then tell my friends and family that I'd been being abused? That was hard, but can you imagine to hold your hand up and say, I have been beating my girlfriend, my wife, my kids. There's a lot of shame around it. So the first thing that they have to do is they have to admit that they're doing it and ask for help, which is really hard. But then there are therapists and anger management groups and groups for abusers and help for abusers that can be really effective. The things that have to happen is the abuser has to recognize that it's not their fault. It wasn't Connor's fault what he was doing, but it was his responsibility. So it was his responsibility. It wasn't. Abusers often will blame you. They'll say, well, she got me so mad, or he got me so mad, or in terms of kids, she was really acting up, and I had to punish her. You can't blame the victim. So that's the first thing. You have to take responsibility for it, and you also have to acknowledge that if it happens again, that there are going to be some penalties. So there are things that can happen to help abusers, but first they have to understand that they are abusers and they have to ask for help. Yes?
Was it hard to fall in love again, or did you kind of think that all relationships were going to be like this, or how did that work?
Was it hard to fall in love again? This question also sometimes is asked, was it hard to trust men again? And the answer, for a lot of people it is, but in my case it wasn't. Because it was somehow really clear to me that I had fallen in love with the wrong person, that most men are fantastic and would never do this to me. Maybe because I'd had such a childhood filled with really great men. But I tell you the thing that was the hardest. It wasn't trusting men or trusting love. It was trusting myself. I was so afraid to trust my own judgment because my own judgment had gotten me in so much trouble. I could have picked anybody in New York, and I picked this one. So that took a long time, very, very, very long time. But I started dating again pretty soon. I was remarried within a few years. But there are lots of victims who say they never want to be in love again because they're just too scared. That's pretty normal too. Yes? That's a great question. What's the line between understanding and forgiving? I think that we, as a culture, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to forgive people who have wronged us, who've hurt us, who've stolen from us. And I understand that. I think that's very noble. But I believe in forgiving but not ever forgetting. And I'm in a very great position where I can forgive him totally because I haven't seen him in 25 years and he has no power over me. But if he still had power over me, it would be a lot harder, and I think I'd have to be a lot more careful. So to me, the line is you have to take care of yourself and put yourself first, and then you can forgive the other person. And also, it's a really individual thing. I think forgiveness is a very individual thing that's just in your own heart. Yeah? Oh, wait, you know what? Since you asked one already, I'm going to wait and call on somebody else, okay?
Have you ever wanted to contact Connor again since you last saw him? And do you think that for victims of abuse that there's a possibility of reforming a relationship with their abuser, or is that a healthy option at all?
That's a really, really good question. So, have I ever wanted to contact Connor? No, never. It's like one of my most sincere wishes in this life is that I never see him again. Because I tell you, even though it's been so long, if he walked in the door right now, I would start shaking. I would still be afraid. There's something that happens to you when somebody comes so close to killing you. I mean, I really, really am scared of him. He lives in another country now, fortunately. But the other question is, could you rekindle the relationship with somebody who abused you or you abused? Now, this is really tricky because for some reason, abusers and victims always want to get back together. And it takes victims an average of 7 attempts to leave before they actually leave. Because there's all these breaking up and reconciliations. I don't know. I think that if I had been abused by somebody, I'd be very wary of being with them again. And I'd have really strict rules that were public, that all of my friends knew, that all of the family members, everybody knew. So there'd be like, have you guys ever heard the saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant? Like if everybody knew what had happened and what was going on, I think that would be a good safety net. You?
Why do you think he was, he's not reached out or tried to find you?
You know, I've been really public. First of all, it's not his real name in the book. His identity is really disguised. So he has no vested interest in unmasking himself and saying he is the person. And by a weird quirk, he changed his name after we got divorced. So lots of people could read Crazy Love and know him and not know that he was the person. So I think that he wants to stay hidden. That's one reason he hasn't contacted me. But also, remember when I said that love is what triggers abuse? Intimacy triggers abuse? And by the time my book came out, he and I hadn't spoken in, 15 years. And so we were no longer anywhere close to intimate. And I think he could see it in a more rational way. He could see there's no reason to contact her. There's nothing. He's not going to apologize. He's not going to, I think he very much wants this to be something that's very far away because it's a threat to him on many, many levels. Yeah? Okay. I'm going to get to you too. I'll answer them really quickly. And then I'm happy to stay afterwards if people want to ask more questions, but I'm sensitive that you guys have things to do, and I'm very appreciative that you've listened so respectfully. So go ahead.
You said that one of the people that helped you for your relationship was one of Connor's best friends. Did you cut all ties with his family?
Mostly. You know what was funny is Connor didn't have very many friends, so it was pretty easy to do. And I cut all ties with his family because his family was so troubled. I stayed in touch with that man for a little while, but he called me about maybe 2 years later. It was such a nice call. He called and he said, look, I wanted to let you know this is the last time that I can contact you because he was still really good friends with Connor. He's like, I need to go be there for him. But I want to tell you it wasn't your fault. Great message. And that you're a great person, and within 2 or 3 years, you're going to be married to be somebody wonderful, and you're going to have 2 kids. And he was right. And it was an incredible thing. Okay, last question.
You talked about having to pay him to go.
Yeah.
How did that?
Okay, why did I have to pay him? This was so crazy. So, I called the police, I filed the restraining orders. We were in graduate school together at the same time, so we had about 6 months until we got our degrees. So we had 6 months where we had to be on the same campus. It was very awful and dangerous and crazy. And I got really angry. And so as we started the process of getting divorced, I got angrier and angrier. And I was like, I'm a victim of domestic violence. This man did this to me. I have proof. And I went to a lawyer with this. And the lawyer was like, look, that's great. Glad you have all of that. But my job is to get you out of this forever. And he said, look, the state that we're in, the state that you're in, they do not care. The courts are all backed up. They have really complicated divorces with kids and custody and abuse, sexual abuse of kids. They are not going to care at all that you have proof and that you're right. And he said, all you want, and he was a very experienced divorce lawyer, all you want is to move on. You're 27, let's just get you out of this. And he was right. And so Connor actually was on the verge of filing for alimony because I had a job. We were about to graduate from business school. I had a job and he didn't. And I was terrified that, judges do crazy things sometimes, that I was going to be saddled with alimony. Can you imagine what that would have done to me? So we put together a little pile of money. It wasn't, you'd be shocked at how little it was. And we said, if we give you this, will you never contact her again and sign everything? And he did, thank God. Alimony is, okay, thank you. For anybody who doesn't know what alimony is, Connor was going to make me pay him financial support on a monthly basis for years. And again, the courts didn't care because I had a job and he didn't. And that I could not have stomached. I could not have taken that. And I also didn't want to be tied to him in that way. The lawyer was right. He just wanted it to be over forever. So that this man was very wise, so that I could start my life and fall in love with somebody else and have kids and, go on to put this behind me. So, yes, I got some very good advice from very many people in the immediate aftermath. And that divorce lawyer, who I hated at the time, because I didn't want to do that, of course. But it was very, very good and wonderful advice. And I also saw a great therapist. For about 6 months, I saw somebody twice a week whose main goal was just to tell me that it wasn't my fault and that I'd go on to live a great life. So anyway, thank you all so much.